The rain poured down relentlessly, a curtain of water that blurred the streetlights outside Memorial Grace Hospital in Chicago. It was one of those nights where the world seemed cloaked in a heavy, impenetrable gray. Inside the hospital, Nurse Emily Harper sat at her station, the soft glow of the monitors illuminating her tired face. Emily, a woman with over a decade of experience, had seen her fair share of heartbreak and miracles in this very building. Yet, as she sipped her lukewarm coffee, she had no inkling that this night would challenge everything she thought she understood about the world. The soft chime of the automatic doors broke through the hum of fluorescent lights and the patter of rain against the windows. Emily barely glanced up at first, expecting to see a visitor or an ambulance crew rushing in. But the mug in her hands slipped as she turned to the source of the sound. Standing in the doorway was a lion. For a moment, Emily thought she was dreaming or perhaps hallucinating from sheer exhaustion. The massive lion stood still, its golden mane dripping with rainwater, as if it had emerged from the storm itself. Behind it, the rain continued to rage, casting the scene in an almost mythical light. The hospital lobby fell silent. Staff and patients froze, their conversations and movements arrested by the sheer impossibility of what they were seeing. Emily's heart pounded, her instincts torn between fight and flight. But then, something caught her attention. In the lion's powerful jaws was a small, wrapped bundle. The lion stepped forward with deliberate care, its claws clicking softly against the tiled floor. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the bundle, now noticing the delicate fabric soaked through from the rain. A sudden, unexplainable sense of calm washed over her. Despite its size and the primal fear a lion should evoke, this creature radiated an almost sacred serenity. As the lion reached the center of the lobby, it lowered the bundle to the ground with a gentleness that left everyone stunned. It nudged the bundle toward Emily with its nose and then sat back on its haunches, its amber eyes locking with hers. Emily felt something stir deep within her, an unspoken understanding that transcended logic. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to move forward. Kneeling before the bundle with trembling hands, she was aware of the wide, frightened eyes of her colleagues and the tense presence of the security guards behind her, their radios buzzing with anxious chatter. Yet all her focus was on the soaked cloth before her. She carefully peeled it back, revealing what lay within. It was a baby. A tiny, fragile infant no more than a few days old. Its pale skin and bluish lips told Emily that it was barely clinging to life. The child let out a faint, pitiful cry, and Emily's heart broke. Her training kicked in as she assessed the infant's condition. It was cold, dehydrated, and desperately weak. "Pediatric team to the lobby," she shouted, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. She lifted the baby gently, cradling it close to her chest to share her warmth, her own tears mixing with the rainwater on the baby's cheeks. The lion did not move. It sat silently, watching every movement, its gaze following the baby as Emily handed it off to a team of nurses rushing in with an incubator. The moment was surreal. Emily turned back to the lion, questions swirling in her mind like the storm outside. Where had it come from? Why had it brought the baby here? And how could an animal, a predator, show such tenderness and awareness? Before she could speak, the sound of hurried footsteps approached. Dr. John Green, the hospital's chief physician, arrived, his face a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice both commanding and shaken. Emily turned to him, still trembling. The lion brought the baby. It just walked in and laid the child down. It knew something was wrong. Dr. Green's skeptical expression softened as his eyes flicked to the baby being whisked away. And the lion? Emily looked back. But even as the words formed in her mind, the lion began to move. It stood gracefully, its movements slow and deliberate. Without a sound, it turned and padded toward the door. For a moment, it paused, glancing back over its shoulder as if saying goodbye. Then, with the rain still falling outside, It vanished into the storm. The room erupted into motion. Security guards argued over protocols, and hospital staff whispered in hushed tones about the night's impossible visitor. But Emily could barely register their voices. Her thoughts were consumed by the mystery of the lion and the tiny life it had delivered into her hands. Then came another surprise. A nurse approached, holding a small object she had found in the baby's blanket. It was a gold locket, slightly tarnished but engraved with an inscription, "For Sarah. Protect him no matter the cost." Emily turned the locket over in her hands, her heart heavy with questions. Who was Sarah? Was she the baby's mother? What had happened to her? And, most importantly, how was the lion connected to all of this? As the storm raged on outside, Emily felt a deep shift within her. This was more than a miraculous rescue. It was the beginning of a story that would challenge not only her understanding of life but also the profound connections between love, instinct, and the inexplicable forces that guide us. The storm outside subsided to a steady drizzle. But inside the hospital, chaos erupted in waves. While the baby was stabilized in the neonatal unit, questions about the lion's appearance buzzed through the halls. Emily Harper stood in the lobby, staring at the spot where the magnificent creature had been moments before. She clutched the gold locket in her hand, its inscription echoing in her mind, "For Sarah. Protect him no matter the cost." Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the hospital entrance. The automatic doors slid open, and a man stumbled inside, his soaked clothes clinging to him. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a face marked by exhaustion and grief. Clutching a worn photograph in his trembling hands, he scanned the room desperately. Emily stepped forward, her voice calm despite the uncertainty. "Sir, can I help you?" The man's eyes locked onto hers. "I'm looking for my son," he said, his voice cracking. "Please. He's only a few days old. I've been searching everywhere." Emily's breath caught. "Your son? Wait here." She glanced at the photograph he held, her heart skipping a beat. The image showed a young woman cradling a newborn baby, her smile gentle and serene. The woman's face bore a striking resemblance to the photograph inside the locket. She led the man to a quieter corner of the lobby, her thoughts racing. "My name is Emily. What's your name?" "David," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "David Callahan. My wife, Sarah, she passed away 3 days ago. There was an accident. Our car went off the road during the storm." His voice faltered, and he wiped at his eyes. "I managed to climb out and tried to get help. But when I came back, the baby, he was gone." Emily's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "David, I need you to tell me more about Sarah," she said gently. "Did she have anything to do with a lion?" David froze, his face a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "A lion? What are you talking about?" Emily hesitated, unsure how to explain. "A lion brought your baby to us tonight. It walked into this hospital carrying him in a blanket and left him at my feet." David's expression shifted from shock to something deeper, understanding. His shoulders sagged as if some part of him had been expecting this. It must have been Solomon." "Solomon?" Emily prompted, her curiosity intensifying. David took a shaky breath. "Sarah grew up near a wildlife sanctuary. As a girl, she spent all her time with the animals, especially a lion named Solomon. She said he wasn't like other lions. He was different, almost like he could sense what people needed." His voice softened. "She always believed he'd protect her, no matter what." The room seemed to grow quieter, as though the storm outside had stilled to hear his words. Emily glanced at the locket in her hand. "This was with the baby," she said, showing him the inscription. David's face crumpled as he pulled a matching locket from his pocket. "Sarah gave this to me before she died," he whispered. "She said if anything ever happened, Solomon would know what to do. I thought she was delirious, talking nonsense, but now," his voice broke, and tears spilled freely down his cheeks. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. The pieces of the story were beginning to fit together. Though the picture they formed was extraordinary. Almost too incredible to believe. "The baby is alive. David," she said. Her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "He's in the neonatal unit now. Safe and being cared for. But the lion saved him. Solomon saved him." David's head dropped into his hands. And his shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Emily gave him a moment. Her own thoughts swirling. How had a lion, an animal from Sarah's past, found this baby? Recognized its peril. And carried it to safety? "I need to see him," David said suddenly. His voice raw but resolute. "Of course," Emily replied. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and led him toward the neonatal unit. As they walked, David glanced at her. "Do you believe in things that can't be explained?" Emily paused, considering her words. "I've always believed in love. And maybe there's more to love than we understand." David nodded, as though her words confirmed something he already knew. When they reached the glass window of the neonatal unit, Emily stepped aside, allowing him to see his son. Inside, the baby lay in an incubator, his tiny chest rising and falling with the aid of a respirator. Though frail, there was a resilience to him, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the room. David pressed a hand against the glass. His tears renewed. "He looks just like her," he whispered. Emily stood beside him, the weight of the night's events settling into her chest. Though answers remained elusive, one thing was clear: love, whether human or animal, had the power to transcend even the most insurmountable obstacles. As she watched David silently connect with his child, Emily couldn't help but feel that the lion's actions, guided by a love that defied comprehension, had restored something precious to this family. And perhaps, in the process, it had reminded everyone of the extraordinary forces at work in the world. The hospital buzzed with cautious optimism as the storm finally subsided. The infant, though fragile, was stable. David remained by the incubator, his gaze fixed on his son. The staff worked around him, a hushed respect for the emotional weight of the moment keeping the usual chatter to a minimum. Nurse Emily Harper stood nearby, observing father and child as she clutched the gold locket. Though the immediate crisis had passed, questions lingered like the damp chill in the air. How had Solomon known where to bring the baby? How could a wild animal exhibit such extraordinary understanding? Emily felt an ache of wonder and curiosity. Before she could dwell too long, a security guard entered the neonatal unit, his face grim. "Miss Harper," he began, his voice low. "We've got another situation at the main entrance." Emily's heart sank. She exchanged a glance with David. "Stay here with your son," she said gently. "I'll handle this." In the main lobby, the scene was anything but calm. A crowd had gathered: reporters, police officers, and curious onlookers who had somehow heard whispers of the lion's miraculous appearance. Emily pushed through the throng to find Carl, the head of hospital security, in conversation with two police officers. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her tone steady despite the chaotic energy surrounding them. Carl gestured toward the entrance. Standing just beyond the glass doors was a figure Emily recognized immediately: David. But this David looked different, like a shadowed reflection of the man she'd left moments ago. "Who is this?" she asked, her confusion evident. "It's him," Carl said, frowning. "He says he's David Callahan. But he looks so." Before he could finish, the man at the entrance stepped forward. Emily felt her breath catch. This wasn't a shadow or trick of the light. It was David. Somehow changed. His eyes were different, hardened, haunted. "Emily," the man said, his voice quiet but unmistakable. "It's me." Her head swam. She turned to Carl, searching for answers, but found only confusion in his expression. "David's upstairs," she said firmly. "I just left him with his son." "That's not possible," the man at the door said, his tone steady. "I don't have a son." Before Emily could respond, a commotion erupted behind her. Turning, she saw the crowd parting, making way for another figure. Solomon. The lion moved with purpose, its golden mane shimmering in the faint light. It stopped at the threshold, its amber eyes fixed on Emily. The room fell silent, the air thick with a tension that was neither fear nor awe but something in between. Emily looked back at the man who called himself David, then toward the hospital stairs, where the Real David stood, watching with wide, terrified eyes. "This can't be," she whispered, clutching the locket tighter. Solomon let out a low rumble, the sound resonating in the stillness. Something bigger than any of them was at play, and as the lion stepped forward, Emily realized that their story was far from over.